When doing consults or workshops, I commonly get asked this question: why don't I feel grief? They are concerned that they're pushing their feelings down, or worse, that they're a horrible person for not feeling the grief that they believe they should be after a loved one dies. And it's a difficult question to answer on the spot because there are a lot of different reasons. So if this is you, let's go through the list and see if any resonate with you. Before we begin, we post death and dying related videos every Friday. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's talk, why aren't I feeling grief? Before we begin, I want to make it clear who this video is for, aside from just those who find this kind of thing interesting. This video is for those people who are concerned about or who have noticed that when someone close to them dies, they aren't feeling what they think they should be. This video is not for those who are concerned or annoyed that someone they know isn't showing big emotions in grief after someone dies. That is a different kettle of fish that we can address some other day. So let's take a look at the possibilities. Anticipatory grief. If your loved one was terminally ill or severely addicted to drugs or alcohol or anorexic or had Alzheimer's, you very likely experienced anticipatory grief while they were alive. You were grieving the anticipated loss. This is a completely natural thing to feel and for the brain to go through. And you are more likely than not going to experience anticipatory grief in this situation, which could have gone on for months or years. So when the person does eventually die, you may not feel overwhelming feelings of grief because the brain's already processed it. So the fact that you may not be feeling big feelings is not something to be concerned about. Also, in this case, the fact that you may be feeling strong feelings of relief is also very common and does not make you a bad person in any way. Grief process. The 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross described in the 60s, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, is a great example of an idea being taken completely out of context. Firstly, she was using those stages in regard to the terminally ill individual coming to the understanding that they were going to die. But she also stated that grief wasn't linear and that a dying person may not feel some of these things. And because it's been taken completely out of context, people often think that to grieve, they must feel these 5 specific emotions. And yes, a lot of people will, but numbness is also a very common part of grief, especially when the death was sudden or unexpected, or if there was a lot of death going on at that time. If this is you, that numbness and shock will eventually pass and you will be able to access your emotions and work through them. It may be in a few weeks, months, a year. Just don't try and force it because that won't work. Avoidance. A lot of people, often men, don't realize they are subconsciously avoiding grief and not allowing themselves to feel it. You may be drinking more, or throwing yourself into work or the gym, or going on a long sudden vacation. It may take someone else telling you what you're doing for you to gain some self-awareness in this area. Running away and pushing your feelings down is not going to work in the long run. You weren't that close. Your level of grief is often linked to how much you will need to adjust to a new normal. Not necessarily a new practical normal, but an emotional and psychological normal. You may be sorry that your grandma died and you feel bad that your mum is upset she lost her mum, but you don't really feel anything because you only saw her a couple times a year and you didn't really know her. And that's fine. You're not supposed to feel grief if this doesn't feel like a loss to you. Acknowledge and support your mum in her time of grief, yes, but you're not a bad person because you don't have this feeling of grief in this situation. I hope you're learning something and finding this interesting. If you have, please show us some love and click the like and subscribe buttons. And if you know someone who is concerned about this, maybe you send this video on to them or suggest booking a consult with us. The link to our website, as always, is in the description. Intellectualization. This is something we're going to do a full video on soon because I see a lot of it within the death positive community and it's not actually healthy. Intellectualization is a psychological defense mechanism where the person avoids uncomfortable emotions by focusing on facts and logic. You're thinking, well, I acknowledge that death is natural and normal, and therefore we probably shouldn't care that it just happens. These people don't understand this logic like I do, and why are they crying at something so basic of life? Okay, I dramatize for effect, but you get the idea. Being a thinker and having logic and reason doesn't inherently preclude feeling. In fact, deep down, one seldom exists without the other. Our thoughts make us feel things, and our feelings make us think things. The problem with intellectualization is when a person uses it as a defense mechanism, they don't allow both sides to exist. Instead, they use thinking to distance themselves from emotion, hence not feeling grief. You need to note that you are intellectualizing and then allow yourself to feel your emotions so they can be processed. Personality disorder. This is unlikely, but still a possibility. You may have a personality disorder such as antisocial personality, even if it is on the lower end of the spectrum and you're just not aware of it. This means that you don't feel things like others do, and in order to feel anything, that emotion needs to be on the extreme end. So you may not feel grief when a parent or sibling dies, but you may be able to feel a certain amount of grief when your long-term partner dies, for example. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, just that your brain wiring is different. Abuse. There are many ways a child in an abusive home can adapt to survive, and one of them is to push down any emotion, particularly if crying or looking sad resulted in physical punishment. Then you get older, you leave that environment and you're safe, and you find you still can't access your emotions. Your emotional and psychological growth have been stunted during those important formative years. So when you suffer a great loss as an adult, you find feeling your grief difficult to access. This is to be expected, and a good grief counsellor would probably be a good idea. Autism. I include this not because those with autism don't feel grief, but because I know it will come up in the comments. Remember at the beginning of this video when I said this video is for those concerned that they aren't feeling grief, not for those annoyed that someone they know isn't showing grief? Well, this point is for the latter. Research is still ongoing in this area, but for the most part, those on the autism spectrum do still feel the same grief response as those who are not on the autism spectrum. Where it differs depends on which of their autistic traits are more prominent. When interviewing those with autism who have gone through grief, many said that they had difficulty being able to connect with their emotions. Some cried and showed emotions, some didn't. Many showed a delayed or extreme emotional response. Many experienced an increase in their autistic traits like sensory difficulties, meltdowns, shutdowns, executive functioning difficulties. And many found it difficult to understand what to do in social situations such as hospital visits and funerals. The point is, it's not that autistic people don't feel grief, it's that their processing of grief can be different due to brain wiring, and therefore from the outside it may not look like they're grieving. I can't even believe I had to explain that. I thought that was obvious. Everyone grieves differently, and in different amounts for different losses. The dramatic shows of grief in movies and TV are not that realistic in real life, and it's often not as sudden as it is on TV either. If you are having difficulties feeling your emotions, checking in with a grief counsellor would probably be a good idea. And with that, go talk death.